The Underground Railroad was not a place marked on maps or a line of tracks stretching across the land. It was a hidden world built on courage, trust, and the shared belief that freedom was worth every risk. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, as slavery shaped daily life across much of America, this secret network of people, routes, and safe locations emerged as a lifeline for those determined to escape bondage. It existed in silence, in whispers, and in the bravery of ordinary individuals who chose to act in extraordinary ways. At its the Underground Railroad was powered by human connection. Enslaved Africans relied on memory, intuition, and community knowledge to navigate landscapes filled with danger. Free black communities, abolitionists, and allies offered shelter, guidance, and protection, often at great personal cost. Each step forward required absolute trust, because discovery could mean capture and the loss of everything gained. Yet despite these risks, the network grew, adapting to new threats and finding new paths when old ones became too dangerous. What makes the Underground Railroad remarkable is not only the journeys it enabled, but what it represented. It was a direct challenge to a system that claimed to control bodies, movement, and destiny. Every successful escape weakened the idea that slavery was unbreakable. Every safe house became a quiet declaration that the laws enforcing bondage did not define morality. Through patience and coordination, this hidden resistance turned ordinary homes, churches, and roads into symbols of hope. The stories of the Underground Railroad are not just about escape. They are about determination, solidarity, and the belief that freedom could be claimed even when denied by law. These stories connect deeply to the broader history of resistance and survival that shaped America itself. As we begin this journey into the world of the Underground Railroad, we uncover how courage moved through shadows and how quiet actions helped change the course of history. If you find value in exploring these untold stories and want to continue learning about the hidden forces that shaped the past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these important histories alive and shared with the world. The Underground Railroad did not appear suddenly, nor was it invented in isolation. It grew out of long traditions of black resistance that had taken shape from the very beginning of enslavement, shaped by survival instincts, shared memory, and collective cooperation. Long before organized networks existed, enslaved Africans were already resisting in ways both visible and hidden, learning how to move quietly, how to read landscapes, and how to rely on one another in a world designed to deny them control over their own lives. These earlier forms of defiance created the knowledge and confidence that later made escape networks possible. From the first generations brought across the Atlantic, resistance became a daily practice rather than a single act. It lived in the decision to preserve language and belief, to form families under constant threat, and to protect one another through shared labor and quiet solidarity. These communities developed systems of communication that did not depend on written records, passing information through songs, stories, and coded language. Such methods were born of necessity, but they also created bonds of trust that could not be easily broken. Over time, this shared experience taught people how to cooperate under pressure and how to act collectively without drawing attention. As these traditions deepened, survival itself became a form of defiance. Knowing when to endure and when to act required careful judgment, and those skills were passed from one generation to the next. People learned how to observe patterns, recognize moments of opportunity, and understand the risks involved in movement. These lessons were not theoretical. They were learned through lived experience, shaped by encounters with danger and moments of narrow escape. By the time escape routes began to form more clearly, the knowledge required to navigate them already existed within black communities. The Underground Railroad drew directly from this foundation. It was not simply a network of locations, but an extension of relationships that had been built over decades. Cooperation was essential, because no single person could succeed alone. Trust connected individuals across plantations, towns, and regions, allowing information to travel quietly and efficiently. Each successful journey relied on the willingness of others to offer guidance, shelter, and protection, often without knowing the outcome. This collective effort reflected earlier patterns of resistance, where survival depended on shared responsibility rather than individual action. What distinguished the Underground Railroad was its ability to adapt these traditions to changing conditions. As laws tightened and surveillance increased, strategies evolved. Routes shifted, signals changed, and new allies were incorporated, yet the core principles remained the same: cooperation, discretion, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of freedom. These principles had sustained communities through enslavement and continued to guide them as resistance took on new forms. This continuity reveals an important truth about the fight against slavery. Resistance was not limited to moments of rebellion or escape. It was embedded in everyday life. The Underground Railroad represented one of its most organized expressions. But it was never separate from the broader struggle. It drew strength from centuries of endurance and from the understanding that freedom could be pursued even when it seemed unreachable. By seeing the Underground Railroad as part of this longer history, its significance becomes clearer. It was not an isolated chapter, but a culmination of strategies refined over time. The same resilience that preserved families and culture under enslavement now guided people toward liberation. In this way, the Underground Railroad stands as evidence that resistance was constant, evolving, and deeply rooted, shaped by generations who refused to accept oppression as their destiny. As the traditions of resistance and cooperation took more organized form, free Black Americans became the backbone of the Underground Railroad, transforming shared knowledge into deliberate action. Living in a space between danger and possibility, they understood both the risks faced by those fleeing bondage and the realities of navigating a society structured against them. This position gave them insight that no map or written guide could provide. They knew which roads were watched, which communities could be trusted, and how to move without drawing attention, turning everyday familiarity into a powerful tool for survival. Their role was rarely visible, yet it was constant. Free Black communities functioned as hubs of information, where news traveled quietly through conversation, observation, and experience. A change in patrol patterns, a hostile, or a safer route north could mean the difference between freedom and capture. This information was shared discreetly, often embedded in ordinary interactions that appeared harmless to outsiders. Trust was the currency that sustained this system, built over years of shared struggle and mutual dependence. Guidance often began long before an escape attempt. Free Black individuals helped plan journeys, advising on timing, routes, and necessary preparations. They understood the physical demands of travel and the emotional weight carried by those leaving everything familiar behind. For many freedom seekers, the presence of someone who had already navigated life beyond enslavement offered reassurance that survival was possible on the other side. This quiet mentorship reflected generations of shared experience, where knowledge was preserved and passed on because it had once been learned the hard way. Protection extended beyond providing directions. Homes, churches, and workplaces became temporary sanctuaries, blending into the rhythms of daily life. Offering shelter required careful judgment, as any misstep could endanger entire communities. Free Black protectors balanced caution with courage, aware that visibility could invite scrutiny while absence could mean abandonment. Their actions were shaped by an understanding that resistance did not always look dramatic. Sometimes it meant maintaining normalcy while quietly defying the rules that enforced bondage. Communication held the network together, without written records or formal coordination. Messages relied on memory and context. Words carried layered meanings, understood only by those who shared the same experiences. This form of communication was not improvised. It evolved from earlier practices developed under enslavement, where secrecy had been essential to survival. By adapting these methods, free Black Americans ensured that information could move efficiently without leaving evidence behind. The presence of free Black organizers also challenged prevailing assumptions about authority and capability. They demonstrated leadership grounded not in official titles, but in responsibility to community. Their efforts revealed a vision of freedom rooted in collective well-being rather than individual escape alone. Each successful journey reinforced connections between communities, strengthening the network and expanding its reach. These roles came with constant risk. Legal status offered limited protection, and involvement in escape efforts could invite retaliation. Yet the commitment to assist did not waver, shaped by the understanding that freedom was incomplete if it remained inaccessible to others. This sense of shared destiny echoed earlier forms of resistance, where survival depended on looking beyond oneself. By centering free Black Americans in the story of the Underground Railroad, the narrative becomes more complete. It reveals a system sustained not primarily by outside intervention, but by those who lived within its dangers and possibilities every day. Their leadership, shaped by local knowledge and deep trust, turned scattered acts of defiance into a coordinated movement. In doing, they transformed resistance into a pathway, carrying forward the long struggle for freedom with patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. As free Black Americans organized, guided, and protected those seeking freedom, they were not entirely alone in their efforts. Alongside them, a smaller but significant number of white abolitionists, religious communities, and political activists chose to challenge the system of slavery, motivated by convictions that placed conscience above conformity. Their participation did not replace Black leadership, but it intersected with it, forming alliances shaped by shared purpose and constant risk. For many of these individuals, opposition to slavery emerged through moral or religious belief. Churches, particularly those that emphasized equality before God, became spaces where the contradictions of slavery were openly questioned. Sermons and study groups encouraged reflection on justice, responsibility, and human dignity, pushing some congregants to move from belief into action. This shift was rarely simple. Choosing to assist the Underground Railroad meant defying laws, social expectations, and, in some cases, family ties. Yet for those who acted, faith became a guide for behavior rather than a private conviction. Political opposition also played a role, especially as debates over slavery intensified. Some activists viewed the institution as incompatible with the nation's founding principles, arguing that a society built on freedom could not sustain bondage without undermining itself. Their involvement took many forms, from legal advocacy and publishing to offering practical support along escape routes. While their methods varied, these efforts contributed to a growing public conversation that made the system of slavery increasingly difficult to defend. Within the Underground Railroad, white allies often used their relative social position to reduce risk at critical moments. Their homes could attract less suspicion, and their mobility sometimes allowed them to transport people or information across monitored areas. This access, however, did not guarantee safety. Discovery could result in severe penalties, public condemnation, or lasting damage to reputation. Participation required a willingness to accept consequences for actions that challenged accepted norms. The collaboration between Black organizers and white allies required careful negotiation. Trust had to be earned, not assumed, shaped by long histories of betrayal and inequality. Successful cooperation depended on respect for Black leadership and an understanding of local conditions that outsiders could not fully grasp. When these alliances functioned well, they strengthened the network, allowing resources, information, and protection to flow more effectively. These relationships also reflected broader tensions within the abolitionist movement. Not all who opposed slavery agreed on methods or goals, and disagreements often emerged over strategy, timing, and the meaning of equality. Despite these divisions, the shared commitment to ending slavery created space for cooperation where it mattered most. The Underground Railroad became one of the few places where belief translated directly into action, testing the depth of moral conviction. By situating white abolitionists and religious groups within this larger story, their role becomes clearer and more balanced. They were neither the sole drivers nor passive observers, but participants in a movement led by those most affected. Their involvement demonstrates how opposition to slavery crossed social boundaries, uniting people through a shared recognition that the system was wrong. This chapter reinforces the continuity of resistance already traced. Just as earlier generations built survival networks under enslavement, the Underground Railroad drew strength from alliances formed across difference. These collaborations did not erase inequality, but they revealed the potential of collective action guided by conscience. Together, these efforts chipped away at an institution that relied on silence and compliance, proving that even deeply entrenched systems could be challenged when individuals chose responsibility over comfort. As the Underground Railroad expanded through cooperation and trust, secrecy became its most valuable protection. In a world where written records could be seized and spoken plans could be overheard, communication had to move in ways that blended seamlessly into everyday life. Songs, symbols, language, and oral traditions formed a quiet system of exchange, allowing information to travel without exposing those who carried it. These methods did not emerge suddenly. They were rooted in earlier survival practices developed under enslavement, refined over generations when silence often meant safety. Music carried meaning beyond sound. Spirituals and work songs, sung openly and without suspicion, held layers of understanding that only certain listeners could fully interpret. Melodies that expressed sorrow or hope also carried direction, timing, or reassurance. To an outsider, these songs reflected emotion or faith. Within the community, they conveyed knowledge shaped by shared experience. This dual meaning allowed information to move freely while remaining hidden in plain sight, transforming culture into protection. Symbols served a similar purpose. Ordinary objects, marks, or gestures signaled danger or safety without drawing attention. A lantern placed in a window, a quilt hung in a particular pattern, or a door left slightly open could communicate whether a space was safe. These signals relied on familiarity rather than explanation, making them effective precisely because they appeared ordinary. Their power lay in collective understanding, built through trust and repetition rather than written instruction. Language itself became a tool of navigation. Words were chosen carefully, shaped by context and tone. Conversations that seemed casual often carried deeper meaning, allowing people to share plans or warnings without revealing intent. This form of communication demanded attentiveness, encouraging listeners to read between the lines and recognize subtle cues. It reflected a long tradition of speaking safely within unsafe systems, where clarity for some required obscurity for others. Oral tradition tied these elements together. Stories passed from person to person preserved memory, instruction, and caution. They carried lessons about rotes, allies, and risks, shaped by the experiences of those who had gone before. Unlike written records, these stories adapted to changing conditions, evolving as new threats emerged. Oral transmission ensured that knowledge remained flexible and difficult to trace, reinforcing the resilience of the network. These practices also strengthened community bonds. Sharing coded information required trust, and trust deepened through repeated cooperation. Each successful exchange reinforced confidence in the system and in one another. This collective participation echoed earlier forms of resistance, where survival depended on mutual understanding and shared responsibility. Communication was not merely functional. It was relational, sustaining both safety and solidarity. The use of songs, symbols, and language also challenged assumptions about power. It demonstrated that control did not depend solely on force, but on understanding, creativity, and adaptability. Those denied formal authority shaped their own systems of knowledge, turning culture into strategy. This quiet intelligence allowed the Underground Railroad to endure despite constant pressure, proving that secrecy could coexist with openness when guided by shared meaning. By weaving communication into daily life, the network reduced risk without abandoning connection. Information flowed steadily, carried by voices, gestures, and memory rather than paper or proclamations. This approach connected directly to the broader history already traced, where resistance survived through creativity and cooperation. In this way, communication became both shield and bridge, protecting lives while guiding them toward freedom, and revealing how deeply cultural expression shaped the struggle against slavery. Every journey along the Underground Railroad unfolded under the shadow of constant danger. The decision to escape was never impulsive or romantic. It was a calculation shaped by experience, memory, and an understanding of what failure could mean. Those who chose to flee carried with them not only hope, but the weight of knowing that each step forward could also bring capture, separation, or forced return. Courage, in this context, was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move despite it. Threats surrounded every stage of an escape. Surveillance was embedded into daily life through patrols, informants, and laws designed to criminalize movement. Roads that appeared open by day could become traps by night, and unfamiliar towns carried unpredictable risks. Even landscapes offered no guarantees, as forests, rivers, and weather posed challenges as real as human pursuit. Those fleeing had to balance speed with caution, knowing that haste could expose them while hesitation could cost precious time. The fear of capture extended beyond the individual. Families were often left behind, creating emotional stakes that deepened the risk. The possibility that an escape attempt might bring retaliation upon loved ones weighed heavily, shaping decisions and timing. This reality reinforced the need for secrecy and trust, connecting each journey to the broader network already described. Escape was rarely a solitary act. It depended on others who shared both the danger and the responsibility. Punishment, when it occurred, was meant to discourage not only the person captured, but anyone who might consider following the same path. Stories of failed attempts traveled quickly, serving as warnings within communities. Yet these stories also carried lessons, refining strategies and reinforcing the seriousness of preparation. Knowledge gained through hardship became part of the collective memory, passed on to guide future efforts. Despite these risks, people continued to run. What sustained them was not certainty of success, but the understanding that remaining where they were offered no safety either. Enslavement itself was a daily threat, marked by instability and control. Escape represented a shift in risk rather than its elimination, a choice to face danger on one's own terms. This calculation reveals a form of courage grounded in realism rather than idealism. The journey demanded constant awareness. Those escaping learned to read signs of safety and danger quickly, relying on intuition shaped by long experience. A glance, a pause in conversation, or an unexpected sound could alter a route instantly. This attentiveness connected directly to the communication systems already explored, where coded signals and oral knowledge reduced risk without removing it. Each traveler became both student and practitioner of survival. The emotional toll of escape was as heavy as the physical one. Exhaustion, uncertainty, and isolation tested resolve. Nights spent hiding, days spent moving quietly, and the constant need to trust strangers required resilience shaped by earlier struggles. This endurance reflected the same strength that sustained families and communities under oppression, revealing continuity rather than exception. By understanding escape attempts as calculated acts of courage, the story of the Underground Railroad becomes more grounded and more human. It moves beyond myth into lived experience, where bravery coexisted with fear and hope coexisted with doubt. Each journey represented a moment where history turned on individual decisions shaped by collective knowledge. These journeys, successful or not, chipped away at the system they challenged. They exposed its dependence on force and fear, and they demonstrated that control was never complete. In this way, the danger itself becomes part of the story's meaning. Courage was not measured by distance traveled, but by the choice to step into uncertainty, carrying forward the long tradition of resistance that defined the struggle for freedom. As escape attempts pushed deeper into dangerous territory, the question of destination became as critical as the journey itself. Freedom seekers were not simply running away from bondage. They were moving toward places where the law, however imperfect, offered a measure of protection. Northern states and Canada came to represent more than geographic endpoints. They symbolized the possibility of living beyond constant pursuit, where the threat of forced return was reduced and daily life could begin to take shape on new terms. In the northern states, the promise of freedom was uneven and often fragile, yet it carried legal significance that shaped decisions along the Underground Railroad. Crossing certain boundaries could mean the difference between being claimed as property or recognized as a person. These distinctions were well understood within the network, passed along through oral knowledge and experience. Routes were chosen not only for safety, but for what awaited at the end, reflecting careful judgment rather than blind hope. Canada held a particular meaning for many freedom seekers. Its laws offered clearer protection from forced return, creating a sense of distance from the reach of slave catchers and hostile authorities. For those who reached its borders, the crossing marked a profound shift. The journey did not erase hardship or guarantee prosperity, but it offered something rare and powerful: relative security. This possibility reshaped the strategies of the Underground Railroad, extending routes farther north and strengthening connections across borders. Reaching these destinations required endurance that tested both body and spirit. The final stages of the journey were often the most dangerous, as pursuit intensified near known routes and border regions. Yet the knowledge that protection lay ahead sustained many through exhaustion and fear. This awareness tied directly to the communication systems already described, where information about laws, enforcement, and safe communities traveled quietly through trusted channels. Arrival did not mean the end of struggle. In northern cities and Canadian towns, freedom seekers faced unfamiliar environments, economic hardship, and social barriers. Still, these challenges existed within a different framework. The absence of legal ownership allowed families to reunite, work to sustain themselves, and participate in communities with greater autonomy. These new beginnings reflected the long tradition of resilience that had carried people through enslavement and escape alike. Free Black communities played a crucial role in receiving those who arrived. They offered guidance, shared resources, and helped newcomers navigate new legal and social landscapes. These communities extended the Underground Railroad beyond escape itself, transforming it into a support system for rebuilding life. The continuity between flight and settlement reveals how freedom was understood not as a single moment, but as a process requiring collective care. The pursuit of northern states and Canada also carried symbolic weight. It exposed the contradictions within a nation divided by its own laws, where freedom depended on geography rather than principle. Each crossing highlighted the fragility of rights and the lengths required to claim them. This reality reinforced the broader narrative already traced, where progress was contested and uneven, shaped by both resistance and restriction. By aiming for places with greater legal protection, freedom seekers asserted their understanding of law and power. They navigated systems designed to confine them and identified spaces where those systems weakened. This strategic movement reflected generations of learned awareness, where survival depended on reading not only people and landscapes, but institutions themselves. In this way, the destinations of the Underground Railroad complete the story of courage already told. They reveal that escape was guided by knowledge as much as by hope, and that freedom was pursued with intention rather than chance. Northern states and Canada became part of a larger geography of resistance, shaped by the determination of those who refused to accept the boundaries imposed upon them through their journeys. These spaces were transformed from distant ideas into lived realities, carrying forward the enduring struggle for safety, dignity, and self-determination. The Underground Railroad stands as one of the most profound challenges to the institution of slavery in American history, not because of its size or formal organization, but because of what it revealed. It exposed slavery as a system that depended on constant surveillance, force, and fear to survive. Every successful escape demonstrated that bondage was neither natural nor accepted, but actively resisted by those it sought to control. In this way, the Underground Railroad undermined the moral and legal claims that attempted to justify slavery, showing that human determination could weaken even the most entrenched systems. Beyond individual journeys, the network reshaped the broader fight against slavery. It strengthened abolitionist movements by turning belief into action, transforming opposition from words on a page into lived resistance. Stories of it circulated quietly at first, then more openly, fueling debates and challenging the nation to confront its contradictions. The Underground Railroad made the reality of slavery impossible to ignore, connecting distant communities through shared responsibility and moral urgency. It reminded the country that laws enforcing injustice could be questioned and defied when conscience demanded it. The power of the Underground Railroad also lies in its symbolism. It represents solidarity across difference, built on trust, cooperation, and shared risk. Free Black communities, enslaved individuals, and allies from various backgrounds contributed in ways shaped by their circumstances, creating a network that relied on human connection rather than authority. This cooperation did not erase inequality or danger, but it demonstrated the potential of collective action guided by empathy and resolve. The network became a living example of how resistance could operate quietly, persistently, and effectively. Its legacy extends far beyond the period in which it operated. The strategies, values, and lessons of the Underground Railroad echoed through later movements for justice, influencing how communities organized and supported one another under pressure. It offered a model of resistance that emphasized preparation, communication, and mutual principles that would reappear in future struggles for equality. By challenging slavery not only through protest but through practical action, the Underground Railroad helped redefine what resistance could look like. Remembering this history is not simply an act of reflection. It is a way of understanding how change happens. The Underground Railroad teaches that progress is often driven by ordinary people making difficult choices in extraordinary circumstances. It shows that solidarity can cross boundaries imposed by law or custom, and that courage can take many forms, from offering shelter to taking the first step into the unknown. Thank you for listening and for taking this journey through one of the most powerful stories of resistance in American history. If this exploration helped deepen your understanding or sparked your curiosity, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and ensures that the lessons they carry continue to be shared with future audiences.